Good afternoon, colleagues. Today we welcome Golbahar Poirier to sing the National Anthem. Welcome. Golbahar has sung with the Amityville Singers for the past 6 years. This group has sung the National Anthem at the International Skating Championship here at Budweiser Gardens. Golbahar currently sings with the London Singers and is excited to be performing at Carnegie Hall this year. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Colleagues, staff, and guests, please stand for the singing of the National Anthem.
Oh, Canada, our home and native land, true patriot love in all our sons command. With glowing hearts we see thee rise, the true north, strong and free. From far and wide, O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. God keep our land glorious and free. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee. O Canada, we stand on guard for thee.
Thank you very much for joining us today. Season, and it's time again this year to kick off the Business Cares food drive. I wonder if I could invite our City of London staff out to join me here. The annual campaign officially starts this coming Friday, and each year the corporation supports the Business Care food drive in a bigger and more profound way. It was one of only 2 endorsed campaigns by the City of London in the past, in the recent history. The food bank plays a crucial role in our community. On average, and unfortunately, they work as hard as they can to assist 9,000 people each month. 40% of that 9,000 are under 17 years of age. Numbers from 2016 show that 41,000 hampers of emergency food were distributed, serving 99,000 people. And over the year, 11,000 different households receive assistance from the food bank. This closely aligns, of course, with our London for All priorities as we work to combat poverty in our community. And thanks to the generosity of Londoners and London businesses who come together to help make the food drive a success. At this time, I would like to invite councillors and members of the senior leadership team to join me in placing their donation in our kind of hampers today, and as we officially kick off the London Cares food drive here at the City of London. And we've got a lot of fine staff members here to assist. Just wondering if any of you wanted to say a couple of words. And that was my guess. Absolutely not. So come on out, colleagues, if you've got your food, please. And staff, please join us up here. We'll fill up these boxes.
I want to know if Phil swears. Am I the only person? Smooth or crunchy? It's Adrian. Probably better than I have no shame.
Colleagues, I wonder if you might also join me and staff, if we can just do a quick picture and we'll push that out on social media to help launch the campaign. So come on out, we'll crowd around, we'll do a picture.
Some days I'm going like, which one do I answer?
Want to get between us? Why is that? I don't know. It's just campaign brochure.
Adriana, Kelly, Barb, come on, Annalisa, Martin, get up here. Lynn, Sandra, Scott.
Hang on a second, I get those.
No one left to take a picture.
Makeup upstairs.
Get up here.
Daryl, come on in here, Daryl.
Well, you guys, get in here. Come on. Come on, Shelby.
Nelly, I'll go for the back row.
Oh, no, that's, no, you're good, you're fine.
Don't worry about it.
Come on in.
Here, you can have slide over this way. Not the picture.
I don't even know where we're
Right over here.
Don't you dare stand in front of me. Say,
Stand right in front of me, that's fine.
yeah, don't worry.
You sure one? To the camera.
Standing up pretty high behind a representative from Human Resources. I don't know if that's, I saw you were spotted.
You were spotted. Thank you.
Great to see you. Welcome back to, yeah, we are. I think that's, we'll just leave it here then, perfect. Thanks again. So we'll go and eat our food either way. Oh, just like, you're fine. See you soon. Okay, thanks. Thank you very much, colleagues and staff, for your generosity. We'll now call the meeting officially to order. I'll look for any disclosures of pecuniary interest. Okay, there are no disclosures of pecuniary interest.
Wait.
Councillor Zafman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sorry, just trying to track down the number. I believe it's number...
Councillor, help is on the way.
Thank you. Is it just this one?
This one? That one first.
I don't need that one, actually. Got it now. 22nd report of Planning Committee, item number 12, dealing with properties that my family has a financial interest in. Thanks.
Thank you. Any others? Okay, we've covered off recognitions, and there is no review of confidential matters to be considered in public. Just before we go into closed session, I believe Councillor Usher would like our attention. Go ahead, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I just want to remind you the reason I was absent last week, and to tell you that I spent the all of last week in Ottawa with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Board of Directors and committee members. There were 100 of us. We were doing advocacy work with the MPs and the ministers and the senators. We had between 100 of us. We split up ourselves into groups of 3s and 4s. And we had 201 meetings. It's a record that we've ever had on Parliament Hill throughout that period of time. And during that time, you know, advocacy meetings, half an hour with each person, we talked a lot about the FCM requirements and on behalf of all municipalities across Canada. We talk about infrastructure, requirements for infrastructure, transit, housing, and in the middle of all this, the Prime Minister announced the new housing strategy, and we also talk about cannabis. So I just wanted you to know, I'll be sending out a little extra note about this over the next few days, but I wanted you to know that all went well, and from my perspective, for all municipalities, I think we did a really good job, and you're going to hear a little bit more about this in the budget of March 2018. Thank you.
Well, Councillor, thank you very much, as always, for your advocacy. How did the meetings go? How did you feel the meetings went?
sensational.
I thought so. Colleagues, let's look to go into closed session now for the reasons outlined on the council agenda. I don't believe there are any additions. Okay, so I'll look for a motion on screen. That's been moved by Councillor Hopkins and seconded by Councillor Ridley. Any discussion? I'll call the question. We're voting.
Councillor Salim? Closing the vote and the motion carries 15-0.
Colleagues, we'll be in Committee Room 3. For anyone watching from home, we could be out prior to, but we will be out of our closed session no later than 5:15. Thanks very much. Okay, colleagues, we're back a little ahead of time. It's fantastic. If we can look then to, just flipping through my agenda here, confirmation and signing of the minutes of the 27th meeting held on November 14th, 2017. That'll be up on screen in a moment. And there it is, moved by Councillor Helmer, seconded by Councillor Armstrong. Any discussion? Let's call the question. We are voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 15-0.
Communications and petitions, there are none. Motions of which notice is given, none. So let's move on to reports. This is the 30th report of the CSC. Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Good afternoon, Mayor. I'm pleased to put the 30th report on to the floor, noting that it was a meeting with our local members of parliament. We talked about three primary issues: economic development, housing, and the environment. Although I have to say our conversation around the environment got kind of clipped a little short because we went into the other areas at length, and it was prefaced by a very well-received presentation from Mr. Hayward.
Any discussion? It's been moved by Deputy Mayor Hubert. Let's call the question. For voting.
Closing the vote.
And if you could, please. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. Carries
15-0. If you could, please, Deputy Mayor Hubert, 31st report of the Corporate Services Committee.
Okay, 31st report. I'm going to pull item number 4, Mayor. I think there'll be some discussion on that. Otherwise, I haven't had any indication of any other items that folks would like to have, colleagues. So I'll put the balance of the report on with the exception of item number 4, which is the vacancy unit rebate. And
Okay, so that'll be up on screen. The entire report with the exception of clause 4. It's on screen, moved by Deputy Mayor Hubert. Any discussion on these items? Councillor Helmer?
Thank you. I just wanted to say, I mentioned at a committee, but I think it's bears repeating. I'm glad to see the report on the diversity information about new employees coming forward, both for the employees who were hired very recently, and then also trying to go retroactive back to May when council gave that direction. I know it was Councillor Slee who brought that forward to have us look at that and have ongoing reporting, and I certainly support the recommendations coming forward. My colleagues will as well.
Councillor Slee.
I just wanted to quickly add, I know Mr. Coxhead's not here, but I'm sure you, oh, sorry. He's away, yes. So just wanted to pass my thanks for doing this. I know we had asked and they delivered, so thankful. So just, I guess you guys could pass that on to him, and as well as the team from HR.
You can find him on Twitter this week. Councillor Morgan.
Yes, and through the chair, it's always nice to see, and I know we're voting on appointments to committees. It's always nice to see some members in the gallery who are on the list of people who we may appoint tonight. So I just wanted to say, pending the vote, of course, if it's successful, thank you for both applying, and thank you for serving on our advisory committees. We need great people to do that, and that only happens when people put their names forward. So thank you.
Okay, other speakers? Oh, he didn't jinx it, but I feel pretty good. Okay, here we go. Let's call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 15-0.
Excellent. Okay, great. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I voted nay on item number 4, so I'm going to ask Vice Chair and future Chair Councillor Helmer to put item 4 on the floor, and I'll look for an opportunity to speak to that as well.
Councillor Helmer, if you wouldn't mind moving that motion, if you want to make some introductory comments as well.
I'll put it on the floor, and I'll probably just speak at the end rather than speaking twice.
Okay, sounds good to me. So I have one speaker. I have Deputy Mayor Hubert. I have Councillor Park.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry. Colleagues, I think this is an important issue. I support where we're headed in this. It's just a matter of pace that I have concerns with. Small businesses, and I know that we're focused sometimes on the large business who has substantial land holdings and whatnot, but small businesses, every nickel and penny in terms of bringing a perhaps derelict or underutilized building back into service counts. And we want to help that. The problem I have is today's date. Today's date is the 28th of November, and we're implementing a change to a significant policy for some of those smaller ones. I'm not fixated on the large ones, okay? Because they have capacities beyond the small. I know it's not very many, but we're changing a policy that will impact small businesses on January of this year. Not much more than 4 weeks from now. And if they are planning their cash flow and planning their programs, it could have that impact. I've had a couple of emails from small business owners saying, hey, how did this happen? We didn't see anything about that. And they're saying, boy, this is going to impact the plans that we have on a go-forward basis. Staff had given to us, Mr. Mayor, a chart on the original agenda. It was on page 26 of our agenda. It categorized 8 different opportunities here. They had recommended number 8 to us, which was limiting the rebate program to new buildings or building additions constructed after December 31st for a period of up to 3 years while phasing out the existing rebate program over 1 year. The cash difference here would have been $200 in 2018, $200,000 in 2018, and again about $200,000 in the 2019 budget. A small impact, but perhaps a big impact in terms of affecting small businesses. So, Mr. Mayor, I voted against it, not because I wasn't in agreement with the policy direction, but rather in the timing of it. So the committee has brought forward a recommendation of phase out of all vacancy rebate programs in 1 year. And I'm suggesting that option 8 would have been more appropriate. So I will vote against this. I would welcome my colleagues to vote against this, and then subsequently I would put option 8 on the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have Councillor Park and Zafman.
Thank you very much. I would encourage my colleagues to support this. As we know, we have many community improvement plans in place in the City of London, and the vital role of those is to really create new opportunities for businesses with the incentives and that sort of thing that these programs offer. I would say that the signal had been set to the community back in March of 2017 when we first began the dialogue on phasing out this program, and I think a lot of councillors stood up and said what their intentions were at that time. It was in the media, and it's not a surprise, I would say. To have these vacancy rebates available to property owners, it just flies in the face of all those plans and all those incentives that we have in place throughout the community. It's not fair for the taxpayers of the City of London to subsidize property owners in that regard when they're not working on properties. Not everybody is in this lump sum of group of people I'm talking about, but there are some property owners that sit on empty vacant properties and they do nothing with them, and this program just incents them to do nothing. So I would encourage my colleagues to support the phasing out of this program. It is not doing anything to better London, it's doing a lot to hinder London. Thank you.
Councillor Zafman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I thought long and hard about this before coming here today, because I think earlier this year I had a small business owner call me and say I missed the deadline to submit my application to get the exemption for this year, the discount, and I felt really bad for that person, because obviously for them as a small business owner it's quite significant. But then I weigh that against the fact that in my ward there's a number of commercial vacant properties that have existed there for over a decade at this point. And there's really no incentive for them to want to try and get more tenants in there while they're getting incentivized to. I mean, it's not an incentive to keep your building vacant, because obviously having a full building is much better than not. But knowing that there is that sort of safety net for them, I think creates an incentive to not maybe work as hard or push as hard to get the tenants that they can. And then the biggest thought that came to me was, so this might be a disincentive to businesses in our community or other people thinking about investing in our community. But then I look at the report and from our staff saying, look at all the other cities that have already done this, are doing it, or are considering it. And I would say that it's pretty much every major urban municipality in at least Ontario. I mean, that's the review that we have. And so is that a concern then if we're not doing this? Then they would say, well, what about the other municipalities that are doing this? But they are going the same direction that we're thinking about, because what it comes down to is that I don't think we have seen that this type of incentive has really drawn out much opportunity, or I should say as much business potential that we maybe thought it would or could. And I think that's the reason why all these other municipalities are going in this direction as well. And the other fact is that, this is approximately $2 million, almost on an annual basis, that we could be recouping for the citizens of London. I mean, as much as I think that incentivizing small business and business growth in general, maybe this is not the best way that it's been done, and we have other ways that we can do that and incent that. And I would be very willing to hear more along those lines. I think Councillor Park touched on community improvement plans, which are exactly that. We can have zones in the community where those incentivizations can be done. But when it's done now without really any significant growth or evidence to say that this is worth it, then I think it's worthwhile for us to say, well, we need to maybe put these dollars to better use for our community. Thanks.
Councillor Turner and Squire.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I hear the concerns that Councillor Hubert raises. I think they're appropriate. I think when we talk about the history of the vacancy tax rebate, we have to also take a look at the changes MPAC made with the manner in which it does assessments of vacant lands. And that's a really important piece. So that happened several years ago. And municipalities were just allowed recently to apply to the province to seek relief from the vacancy tax rebate. Really, those two things should have happened at the same time, so that one taxation method was phased in and the other one grandfathered and phased out. But that didn't happen. Instead, what we're left with is playing catch up. And that's exactly where we are now. So really, we have two discounting schemes in place concurrently that are meant to do the exact same thing. And we're just talking about getting rid of the old one. And I think that's quite appropriate. Now, the concern about the impact on small business, the concern about how quickly that impacts people, those are valid concerns. When I had people write me and say, don't do this, I said, okay, tell me what we should do instead. Because we have a double discount situation here. Tell me what's fair. What would be an appropriate way to implement that? Crickets. I got nothing back. That's disappointing. So if members of the business community are saying, don't do this, but they're not willing to offer solutions, then we're kind of stuck. I had a question, and perhaps I might ask through you, Your Worship. Is there, I mean, obviously the objective is to try and, one, recoup revenues that we lost when MPAC changed its assessment model. The second is to try and incent development and try to incent occupation of building, disincent the land holdings and speculations of land. So, I mean, is there a way that we could address short-term vacancies, the period of time when a tenant moves out and it might take a little bit of time to find a new tenant, say 3 to 6 months, prior to the vacancy tax rebate being not eligible anymore? So through you, I guess, to Ms. Barbone.
Ms. Barbone.
Yeah, or I'm not sure whom. But.
Through the chair. So I think, just to summarize, and forgive me if I don't specifically answer your question, but I think early on this year, when we had put that out there, one of the requirements was to go forward and consult with the business community. We had that notification early on this year with the potential phase out. So we did have some communication with them, and obviously this discussion is really what the community is looking for, is to get a sense of, okay, we know what the impacts are of making the changes, and whether or not that is going to be phased out is part of this discussion based on the feedback that we've heard from the community.
Thank you, through your worship. Perhaps to clarify, is it an option for us to say for short-term vacancies that the vacancy tax rebate could still apply, but in the longer term, past a certain point, if they were unable to find an occupant, that they could no longer do that? I see Mr. Logan's here. Great.
So through the chair, I think that comes down to the development of the program. So whatever we put forward to the minister with respect to a new program, that could take any form. So we've put together the 8 different options that council could consider, but certainly you could look at devising a new program that could potentially put a time limit on the vacancy rebate also. That would certainly be another alternative that we could consider.
Thank you, Ms. Barbone. I appreciate that. That's, I mean, ultimately the 8 recommendations were ones that were contemplated by staff, and I think those were all reasonable as well. I think even if we did offer a period of time that they would still be eligible for the vacancy tax rebate, we'd still get in a situation of double discounting. Even the comments from the chamber weren't, well, there was still, don't do this, and in the alternative, don't do it now. Not really looking for a creative solution on how to address this. So in absence of some good feedback, I guess, some feedback that helps give us direction, I think it's well contemplated. We've been talking about this for close to, well, better part of a year now, and trying to figure out how to address that. We've had a lot of opportunity for input and consultation, and hearing very little in terms of how we can make this program the most effective. I think, given that, I think the proposal that's been put forward by the committee is the appropriate one, and I would support that.
Councillor Squire.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Through you, I don't really disagree with much that's been said, and I think this is a program that does have to go, but I'm with Councillor Hubert that I think the business community needs a little more time to adjust to it. And I'm sort of speaking, I suppose, wearing my other hat as a small business person. These are businesses that may be operating on very small margins, and they plan for the future. They don't plan and say, consider the merits of a program. They don't say, well, I'm going to consider whether it's a program that should continue forever or not. They just include it in their plans. And to make changes really quickly on what is the backbone of the London economy, which is probably a lot of small landlords, they can be hurt by this, and they can be hurt to the extent that they will feel it. And anything to alleviate that, I'm in favor of. So I would vote. My plan is to vote against this, but I would vote for option 8, which contemplates getting rid of it, but just gives a little more time to do that, because I think that in this particular case is the right approach to take. But I think the comments are very good in terms of, I read all the material, and I think to just say, well, I'd like a program to continue forever because we don't want it to end is not a valid argument. So I'm in agreement that it should end. I just want to lessen that blow a little bit. But I did want to mention one other thing that I found very intriguing, and it was from the Downtown Business Association, and that is, where would we put this money ultimately? And I think the idea to use it to some extent for heritage is a good one. I think one of the challenges we've had, and certainly I've seen since the beginning of my term, is that we have people who want to preserve heritage and make a very good argument for preserving heritage, but the private sector that's doing development and the heritage community don't have the ability to do that. They just can't fit that into the parameters of what they're doing. So I'm hoping as we go forward, we use this as an opportunity to create that fund that we need for heritage. I think it's something that we're going to have to do, because if we don't take the step of preserving heritage, I don't think it's going to happen in the way that we would like to see it happen. So I think if we come to next year and we want to put that money somewhere, I think that the suggestion of the Downtown BIA to put it in heritage is a very good one.
Councillor Morgan.
So a couple of questions and a comment through the chair, of course. So I heard a couple of colleagues talk about the differences between 8 and 1. At the committee debate, I actually came in with a kind of a preference order of the options, and 8 was my highest preferred. 1 was, second on the list. Actually, 2 was, but through the discussion, I realized that 2 was the magnitude of the impact on the industrial sector was not that big, and people weren't as concerned about that as they were when they initially gave the feedback because it was a small amount. So a 2 got eliminated for me, and I landed with 1 as the committee's compromise position. I will note that when colleagues talk about the pace, and this is where I'll ask staff to confirm this, the pace of the existing rebate phase out in both options 8 and 1 is similar. The difference is the ability for new buildings to have a rebate for a period of 3 years. But is that correct?
Through your worship, yes, that is correct. The phase out was contemplated to be the same. It just then took into account that there would be a new program for new additions and or construction.
So just so colleagues are clear that that's what they're voting on, the pace of the phase out is the same in 8 and 1 for the existing program. The difference is the option for an additional program for new construction and the ability of that. I was supportive of that. I'm still supportive of 1 as the compromise position of the committee. I'd be supportive of another motion if it came forward along the lines of 8. But I agree with most of the comments that were said about the need to phase this out. I just wanted colleagues to be clear about the components that they were actually voting on and the differences between the two. And on what to do with the money, I know that was raised at the committee as well. I certainly have supported and will support, continue to support the concept that good new initiatives should be considered as business cases in a budget process. I think a heritage fund is a great idea. It could be funded not just through the tax levy, through a business case, but also through bonusing under Section 37 and the way that it's contemplated under the London Plan. There's lots of ways that we could do that, and I think that having a coherent discussion in the budget process about how to do that is the appropriate time. I think that we can handle, the disposition of these funds once we've made the policy decision as, kind of was suggested in the budget process, which will be rectified on December 12th, I believe. But for now, I'm supportive of the policy decision that the committee made, and even if that was defeated, I would support 8 as well.
Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I want to thank the committee for the work that they've done. I'm generally supportive of the recommendation. I appreciate the comments that have been made here tonight, and one of the things I've heard loud and clear is I understand we have been talking about this for probably the past year. So I know the information is out to the public, but I know, being a former small business owner, the importance of budgeting for the next year and how that is important to business to understand that our decision here tonight is going to affect their business as they project their budget for the next year. And I wanted to know what is going to be the process that the city is going to inform the community after the decision is being made here. Are there going to be notices sent out of the decision, or how is it just left up to the community to find out what we've done here?
Ms. Purbo.
Through your worship, we hadn't quite contemplated that yet, but certainly when we sent this out, when this was brought to committee initially back early in the spring, we did, subsequent to that, send letters out to all of the property owners that had received a vacancy rebate over the last year. So we could certainly have a mailing. There's multiple ways of communication, but we could certainly out through our website and have other means to be able to notify them. But we did have a letter that did go out to everybody that had been eligible to advise them of potential changes to the program. So we can certainly follow up and use that same process.
Thank you for that. I would encourage staff to do that. I know it was a form letter that went out, and I know sometimes when people do receive these letters, they contact us. They're not exactly sure what it means, what's being done, has the decision been even made or not. So I think the more information we can give the business community, the better.
Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Your Worship. So as far as letting businesses plan for the future, the rebate happens a year later. So you qualify for the rebate and it's paid out the following year. So I believe we have ample time to communicate this to business owners and they have ample time to plan. The other thing, my concern with option number 8 is this is a particular kind of business. For the most part, this is landowners, landlords. We don't offer tax relief to any other business that's having a hard time conducting their business. So a pizza place that's having a hard time selling their pizzas, we don't give them a property tax rebate because their sale of pizzas has been down because people are having gluten-free diets or something like that. We don't do that in any other line of business. This was, so some of the arguments that we made during the taxi licensing and Uber licensing debate. I remember saying, we don't require so many of these restrictions on other businesses that operate in London. And I failed to see that somebody riding in a taxi was any more vulnerable than so many other kinds of business. So I think if we're looking at this in isolation, and this is something that's always been done, and it's not anything that the municipality chose to do. This wasn't our own incentive program or tax relief program. It was something that was required of us by the province. And I would say that this particular council has been talking about this since the beginning of our term. And at the beginning, it was sort of a pie in the sky. If only the province would change the Municipal Act and reform the Municipal Act and allow us to do this sort of thing, then we would do it. So comments have been made like this since the beginning of our term. And when the changes were made, this council was extremely supportive of, from the beginning when it was, this is what we're thinking of doing as a province. So this council has always been talking about this. I am really supportive of where the committee landed, and I'll be supporting this recommendation from committee tonight.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and through you to my colleagues. I'll point out that it's of course not council that's providing the rebate to these people. It's our taxpayers. We're taking their money and we're saying, hey, we're going to give it to these people because we think that's in your best interest. And we're now, as Councillor Cassidy pointed out, we've been thinking maybe that's not the case for most of the term. And I know when it looked like this became a possibility, I rushed to the Corporate Services Committee suggesting, hey, please consider this. And it's great that we're looking at it now in time for the budget. So if I was going to encourage you to vote for this, one of the reasons would be the great effect it seemed to have on our budget process. So that's one. The other thing that came up in committee is that this program, it takes quite a bit to administer. And one great thing is that this will free up some of our staff to pursue things more in line with our strategic plan. And so I look forward to that happening as well. I think it's equitable as we do this. I was also more inclined to look at number 8 until our budget session yesterday, when Ms. Barbone was pointing out that the taxes for industry in London are right near the bottom. We're the second lowest rate. So it's already very, very low here. So so that made me feel a little better about this, and commercial as well. So I think it's a good time for us to move away from this program and maybe move away from my mic a little bit and move ahead. Another interesting thing that came up, I think Councillor Helmer suggested that if we have a problem still, we can always create another program. But this particular one doesn't look like it's really serving us anymore. So I think it'd be great if we supported this and then at our next council meeting, support its use to reduce the tax levy for our residents. So we're kind of returning that back to them. I'll say through the chair to our residents, thank you for supporting this program so far. Now we're going to hopefully move on to something else. Thank you.
And thank you. Okay, so any other speakers? There are no additional speakers. I'll go to Councillor Helmer.
Okay, I'll try and just keep it very brief. Certainly appreciate the discussion. A couple of points. One is, I think it's sometimes lost in the details that you have to have a vacancy for 90 days to qualify for the program. So really short-term vacancies, I mean, they're not eligible to participate in this program to begin with. I do think this was a change that was made, introducing this rebate program was made a long time ago, frankly, in the late 90s when the business occupancy tax was banished. That was something that people worked on, businesses and municipalities for years to get rid of. And I think that there's been 18 years to kind of get used to the fact that business occupancy tax is not around anymore and we're going to recover the revenue from property tax. I think that we're making a very measured decision here. We could have proceeded in 2017. We could have done it very quickly. We could have had a very quick consultation with businesses. We could have implemented it in the middle of the year if we wanted to, and we could have moved forward very fast. And I think instead what we did was, back in March, we contacted everyone who's benefited from that program recently, told them we're thinking about phasing it out and we want to get your feedback. What do you think about that? And what do you think about the phasing of it? And what's coming back as the recommendation from both committee and from our staff in terms of the phasing is to cut it in half for next year and then to take it to 0 the year after that. And I think that's a very reasonable approach. You know, everyone who is going to have a 90-day vacancy next year is going to be eligible to apply for a rebate. It's just going to be half of what they would have received previously. And then the year after that, there won't be anything. And I think that that's a reasonable way for people to adjust over time to the phasing out of a program of this nature. Last thing I want to say is I went over the 2016-2019 budget to get a sense of, you know, this is a kind of expenditure. It's a tax expenditure where we essentially rebate back taxes. The total cost of that over 4 years is $7.2 million. I went through the strategic investment cases that we had. There were 23 of them in the multi-year budget. Which ones were more than $7.2 million? There was only one, Dundas Place, of $15.6 million. The other 22 were all less than $7.2 million. And I don't think that if we had talked about tax rebate as a strategic area of focus, that we would have funded it to that level, and that it would have even been on the list as a priority. There's a lot of things we have to do in the municipality, and I think we have to keep that in mind when we're looking at something of this magnitude. It's not a small program, it's quite a significant program. It goes to a very small number of property owners. It's about 500 properties in a city of thousands and thousands of properties. So I think we have to keep that in mind. It's a program that costs a fair amount and it goes to a small number of property owners. I think its usefulness has passed. I'm glad to see us move forward with phasing it out. I want to credit the Oldies Village, especially the BIA, who's been working on this issue for coming on 20 years. They saw the vacancy tax rebate program as a barrier to revitalization in that area and have been pushing for it for a long time. Up until now, it was not allowed. The province said this is mandatory, you can't change it. They did a very intensive consultation along the corridor to talk to business owners directly. And even people who had benefited from this rebate program in the past said that it should be phased out, either immediately or slowly over time. These are people who received the rebates in the last couple of years. So I think that gives you a sense of how much of a barrier it's perceived to be in terms of revitalization, at least in that part of the city. And I want to credit them for their sort of tireless advocacy on this file over the years.
Thank you. I have no additional speakers, so I'm going to call the question. Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Barbone. Go ahead, just before we call the question.
Through your worship, I just want to draw attention to Clause E with respect to the report back with respect to utilizing the savings. Further to the budget deliberations, we have removed that. So when we bring that forward, it will be a new ask in the budget going forward. So just want to make sure there's clarity on that if that causes any concern.
Thank you. And we'll finalize our budget in just a couple of weeks, so thanks for flagging that for us. Okay, let's call the question. We are voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 13-2.
17th report, Civic Works, please. And just before we hand things over to you, Councillor Van Holst, thank you very much to Deputy Mayor Hubert for chairing CSC this past year. And good luck, Councillor Van Holst, with your final report.
Thank you very much. I'm going to put the report on the floor, save for 15 and 17. Looking to see if there's any other items that the councillors like to pull. Okay. If not, then I'll
let's move the balance of the
pull the
report,
balance
save
of those
15 and 17. Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. A brief question on item number 7. I certainly support the recommendation coming from committee, but I did have a question about the timing of the results that are coming forward from phase 2 of the pollution prevention and control plan. I know we have the executive summary, there's the staff report there, but I expect that the rest of phase 2 is going to be coming out to the public soon. I know that there are members of the public who are quite interested in knowing the results coming out of phase 2. I don't know if our staff could advise about the timing of that report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We would like to see that in front of committee in Q1 of next year. It also aligns with the desire for us to be ready for the second phase of the federal Clean Water Wastewater Fund intake program, which we anticipate will align about that time as well.
Other speakers? Councillor Park?
Thank you. I just wanted to take this opportunity to really thank staff for item number 4, the downtown infrastructure construction project coordination. I think this is phenomenal work that's been done to bring all these different projects together so the public can have a very simple view as to what's going to be going on in the downtown, despite how complicated those works are going to be with shift rapid transit, the sewer and stormwater work and all those sorts of things. So that's been a tremendous amount of work, and thank you for it.
Thank you, Councillor Park. Other speakers? Councillor Armstrong.
Since this will be the final vote, I just want to take an opportunity to thank the councillor for chairing the committee. Over this last year, he's done a wonderful job. And
okay, but we've still got a number of things to do here before he's done. So let's let him get his
but I didn't
final
want to miss
report
that
delivered,
opportunity.
and then we'll hand things over to you to say thank you. Any other speakers on matters that are before us? Okay, let's call the question.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 15-0.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll put number 15 on the floor, the Safer School Zones Act. This was, along with this came a report from our staff about Vision Zero and all the many things that we're doing for safety, including the new programs. And so I want to thank the staff for all of that work. I also wanted to make just a couple comments about the actual motion that we're voting on. This is for the possibility of photo radar at all the schools. And this one concerns me a bit because it may be a very expensive venture. It's very, of course, very attractive thing to vote for the Safer School Zones Act. Of course, everybody would want to support that. But my concern is it's hard to quantify those kinds of.
Councillor, are you presenting an amendment to the motion before us?
You know, Your Worship, I'm not going to present amendment. I think I'm just going to speak a little bit to what I'm hoping staff can bring back for us with this report.
Beg pardon? You want to speak to the report? I mean,
Yeah,
we've got a couple options here. We've just got I think, an amendment that's been distributed to us. I'm curious, is this something you're presenting? Because
no, actually, I've decided. I think I can. I would prefer just to describe what I'm hoping for, rather than bring forth a number of recommendations, which I think may be a lot of work.
Sorry to
for staff.
interrupt. You've got about 3 minutes. Please go
Okay,
ahead.
yeah, sorry. So, this kind of thing is going to be, of course, a very subjective decision, right? We will look at, is it going to be safer, and then vote on that basis alone. And what I was looking for with this amendment, and I think I can just trust staff to try to come up with something that's more quantifiable. Here's the reason. It's difficult to decide how much safer something is, and some things that would help me in a decision are, for instance, a heat map of a school zone to see where the problems actually are in terms of safety. Is it speed that's the problem? I don't know that's the case, and I think it may not be. But there's going to be very compelling to do this. I think we could try to quantify it somehow in terms of what will this do for us, and also look at some other alternatives. There's engineering alternatives to make things slower, right? We can make the lanes much thinner. We could put staggered bollards in there, so there's really no way that someone can go through quickly. There's other possibilities for education campaigns. One of the ones I would like is to just have people leave earlier so they can slow down and be less rushed. Campaign like Give Me 5 minutes so that I as a child have a safer trip to school, because you don't have to be in a hurry. So those are some of the things I was thinking we could look at. I don't want to give staff too much work to do, but I think if they were able to do that, maybe a graph of during the day of where in time their biggest risks are, we would be able to look at this and come up with a higher quality decision. I also want to put that, compare it to some of the other problems we've got in the last minute. I understand the number of children hit by a car going to school this year was 0, but the number of times children went to school hungry in this city was hundreds of thousands of times, and we're trying to deal with that with this, with our program, donating the cans. And what I would say is, if we have to invest a lot of money into a program, we should really look at what our priorities need to be. So it's really easy to overestimate what a high-ticket safety strategy can do for you. And I want to make sure there's some way that we can evaluate that correctly. Those are my comments.
With 8 seconds to spare, thank you very much, Councillor. I have Councillor Ridley, Zafman, Morgan.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't expect that big of a speakers list on this item, because what this item specifically is doing is authorizing our staff to participate in a provincial discussion about this. We're not agreeing to implement cameras in school zones. We're staying at the table and being a part of the discussion. So I think any of the concerns that Councillor Van Holst or other members have, I think can come up at the appropriate time when we start looking at the implementation stage. But at this point, it's very important for London to be a part of that discussion, because if we do move forward with the implementation, we can make sure that we're doing so in a way that makes sense for the City of London, whether that be a pooled resources with other municipalities as a cost saver or whatever may come from that discussion. So being a part of how we implement this act is important, and this is what the motion in front of us is. It's about being a part of that discussion and nothing more. We're not committing at this point to implementation, and I think you have a council who is committed to looking at best practices across the country and in fact internationally to make all of our citizens safe. So I think that's a second issue and a very important issue that we need to do, but today's motion is merely about being at that table and being a part of the discussion. So I respect if there's some more discussion on whether or not we want our staff to participate in this or not, but I look forward to people supporting it. I think it's a pretty straightforward motion today. Thanks.
Councillor Zafman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I will remove myself from the speakers list because I was going to make similar comments.
Councillor Morgan.
So I'm going to make some comments related to the motion before us. First off, I support us participating because it's subject to council approval. What I would like to have at the time before we enter into an RFP is some information about how effective our 40-kilometer-per-hour speed zones are. So, for example, on Hawthorne Road in my ward, I know there was a speed and volume study done that showed the average speed was 49 kilometers per hour. We now have a 40-kilometer-per-hour speed limit. It would be ideal if we had some sort of follow-up speed and volume study to see if the signs are actually working, because I don't think we need to proceed with enforcement options if the signs are working. If we put up the road signs and they're 40 kilometers per hour and people actually follow the rules, we don't need to invest in any other enforcement mechanisms. However, if they're not working, then enforcement is going to be necessary. So I wouldn't mind hearing from our staff if the intent is, when this comes back, is for us to have some information about the effectiveness, you know, via something like speed and volume studies where we have done some before on the 40 kilometer per hour school zones.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, the intent when we report back would be give you a suite of options with respect to implementation and to where they would be believed to be effective in terms of improving safety. This is a tool that's been used extensively in Western Canada for many, many years. It's worked very well on arterial roads, for example. It may not work as well on some local streets where signage or other options might be better. So the intent is to be at the table, as Councillor Ridley noted, to have that voice around things like default speed limits, as well as the automated enforcement piece, and to bring back a suite of tools that we can use in our school zones throughout the city.
Great, so I'm glad to hear that, and so I'll support this. And I will say on the presentation that was attached, I already have people interested in the respect the limit road signs. So whenever they're available, I'll be lining up for some.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. So it's interesting about being at the table, because you know what they say about being at the table. If you're not at the table, you're probably on the menu. I'm curious, when we sit at tables, though, it's important to know what position that our municipality might advocate for with respect to this. It sounds like it's predominantly a question of developing parameters under which these would be used, but is there an advocacy component to this, or is it really predominantly advisory? I guess.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. The intent of the working group so far has been to frame the discussion as to what happens next with respect to policy and implementation development. Staff's perspective is that we like to have tools in our toolbox we can recommend to council for use, and we would be advocating to have this tool at our discretion and then bring back, as noted in response to Councillor Morgan's question, where we think it's appropriate for London. But to have the tool at hand to us, as well as more control around things like speed limit setting, is important, and this is where we would like to take those arguments forward.
Great, thank you very much, and I appreciate that. I think when we take a look at tools like this, one of the biggest things that I heard when we implemented the 40-kilometer school zone policy is, yeah, but are you going to enforce it? And it's really difficult for us to be in all those school zones, ever present, to be able to enforce those all the time. Automated systems are ever present, and they're an important component of that. I know we're going to have some philosophical differences on that. I know that the question of automated enforcement, certainly when we had the discussion about red light cameras, we got a lot of advocacy for a position not to have red light cameras. But ultimately the question is, there's 4 pillars of the Vision Zero. Enforcement is one of them. And I think it's a really important piece. And so I think it's absolutely appropriate that we sit at this table. It's absolutely appropriate that we have a sense and we have some input into what the municipality's interest might be reflected in what the policies and proposals, those RFPs, and how we might be able to enact that. And I think it's quite appropriate that staff come back and tell us this is what that would look like. So I would certainly echo the comments of Councillor Ridley. It really shouldn't really be up for too much debate. It's a no-brainer. Let's do this and carry on.
Any other speakers? Councillor Helmer, Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you. I can certainly appreciate Councillor Van Hols's desire to have some numbers around, you know, what is the impact of these things and how does it compare against other things that we could do. The good news is that it's very encouraging when you look at the research into automated speed enforcement and what the impact of implementing automated speed enforcement is. There was a Cochrane review. This is a systematic study of multiple other studies, 35 studies covering multiple jurisdictions around the world. The main results from that, I'm just going to read them. Compared with controls, the relative reduction in average speed ranged from 1% to 15%. The reduction in proportion of vehicles speeding ranged from 14% to 65%. In the vicinity of camera sites, the pre-post reductions range from 8% to 49% for all crashes and 11% to 44% for fatal and serious injury crashes. Compared with controls, the relative improvement in pre-post injury crash proportions range from 8% to 50%. So in all of those different measures, you're seeing reductions across all the things that you're trying to reduce when you're enforcing speed limits. I think that the results are pretty compelling. That is a study looking at the implementation in different jurisdictions that have obviously different results, but those are the looking at everything results. So I think it's very promising. I also think that there's an opportunity cost to police who have to go and enforce traffic rules. And if we can put in automated speed enforcement and free up police time to do other things, they frankly have other things that they need to be responding to as well. And I think if we can find a camera that can do that work, and it can issue tickets and can actually get those results in terms of crashes, speeding, collisions, injuries, and deaths, that would be very positive.
Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I just want to take this opportunity to, again, thank Councillor Ridley because she first started talking about school zone, speed limit zones and school zones from the very beginning. And I'm really happy with how we landed there. When we heard about the statistics, when we made that decision to enact these school zones, we saw a huge difference in fatal crashes or fatal pedestrian car interactions from 40 kilometers an hour versus 50 kilometers an hour. There was a steep increase in the risk of fatality, but that's for adults. So it's much worse when a child is struck. It's much worse. It's much more likely to be fatal when a child is struck. So I think it's incumbent upon us to do everything in our power to make it as safe as possible for the children on our streets. I've got 6 elementary schools in my ward, and I sit on the Safe Travel Planning Committee for one of those schools. It has a very active group of parents, and it's a program through the Middlesex London Health Unit. And I would love it if every school in the city participated in this. Now that would cause some trouble with the health unit because they don't have the resources to do this in every single school in the city. But we have a staff member, Mark Ridley, that comes out to our meetings. We meet, I think, at least quarterly, if not more frequently. And we talk about the 3 E's that staff have told us we have to do: enforcement, education, and engineering. All those 3 parts of it are really important if we're going to make a difference. And if we're talking about school zones and we're talking about, well, school's only in session between 9 and 3, I would say that school zones attract families. So you have more kids living around schools, and you have kids always going back and forth to the school because they use the school grounds as their playground, as their park, as their local park. So it's not just during school hours that kids are going to and from the schoolyard. So I'm really encouraged by this. I'm happy to support the staff the recommendation from committee that staff participate in this. I think we can continue to go further and do more, not just in school zones, but in neighborhood zones around the city. I think we must continue to work towards that Vision Zero. And we always have to keep that in mind. And if we start with kids and school zones, this is the perfect place. Thanks.
Other speakers? Okay, I'll just say really quickly from the chair, this can't come soon enough. I know this is step 1, but for the life of me, I cannot understand why people speed in school zones. I think 40 is too fast in a school zone. If you speed in a school zone, you get a ticket. The sooner we can get to that point, the better. And so thank you, Councillor Ridley, for the work that you've done on this and everybody else for supporting it. I'll go to Councillor Van Holst then. We'll wrap this up.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just hope that we get some good numbers about this. And you're welcome to call the question.
Let's call the question. Voting.
Councillor Helmer. Closing the vote and the motion carries 15-0.
All right, so Your Worship, I'm talking about water restrictions here. So some final words here from me on this this issue. I brought some more information to the committee. There's very little debate, or actually no dialogue at all about it, which was disappointing. However, Councillor Armstrong said, well, for a long time we've thought that conservation was very important, and now is it possible that it's not that important? And I thought, hallelujah, I have just witnessed a councillor question the validity of his previous assumptions. And that's the kind of thing that gives me hope for humanity, because there's new information coming up all the time, and we've got to decide if it matches with our beliefs or not. And that's what's going to move us forward. Speaking of new information, I think nobody knows this, but there's a UWO PhD conservation researcher who's asked the city recently if we will help with her research on this particular bylaw, the alternating days for conservation. And the question is, does this help with conservation at all? Because it really wasn't the purpose for us. We just wanted to make sure that everybody wasn't using water on the same day. It wasn't designed to have you necessarily use less water. You see, we were operating very close to our capacity. And the fear was, if there's a hot day, everybody turns on the taps outside and the water all goes out, there will be people who won't be able to turn on the water and get some. We're in a very different position now, because we have a daily use of about 130 million liters a day, but our capacity is 280 million. We could actually double all the water use we have without a problem. What that means is we could double the watering we do without a problem, and that's essentially what it would mean if everybody watered on the same day. So that's no longer a trouble. Now, for people concerned about conservation, well, if you want to conserve because you're frugal and like to save money, well, that's important. If you want to conserve because you're conscientious and don't like waste, well, that's important too. But with this policy, we have been asking you to provide us with a safety net that's no longer needed. It's kind of like holding the ladder for someone who's fixing the eaves troughs. Well, later on, you might ask, now that you're on the ground and packing up to go home, is it important for me to still hold this ladder? And of course they would say, well, although it was important at the moment, now there would be no benefit, so it'd be kind of silly for you to hold the ladder. And I think when we get this research back, we'll find out whether this policy is valuable or not. So I'm also not going to really push anything now, because I don't see anyone watering their lawn in the winter. But if you do happen to be watering your lawn in the winter, then invite a councillor over for a skate. The last thing people might be concerned about is the environment. And is this watering, is it affecting the Great Lakes? Well, they're so massive that all the water being used by all the residents around the Great Lakes would reduce the height, the depth, less than a millimeter. If the Great Lakes were a person donating blood, to service London, it would require less than 1/1700th of a drop. And of course, most that water just goes back in, right? We take it, we put it into some pumps and pipes and apartments and pollution plants, and then pour it back into the river, and it goes back in. So I think we'll find out that in the future, this is not so needed. But those are my words for today, and I'm going to finish up with my last few seconds by thanking the committee for some great work. I think we had, it was very smooth, and I want to thank staff too for the many, many things we accomplished. It was a great pleasure being the chair and working with everybody. And to the new committee, I wish you the best of fortune. Lots more exciting things to hit the ground in London, literally.
And thank you, Councillor Van Holst. Very few people get as excited as you about things like evapotranspiration, and thank you very much for your leadership over the past year. Thank you for chairing the committee so professionally. I'd ask you to just move the motion you already have, and I will look for any other speakers. I see none, so I'm going to call the question. We're voting.
Closing the motion, and it carries 15-0.
Thank you, Councillor Van Holst. All right, 22nd report of the Planning and Environment Committee. Councillor Park.
Thank you. And what a year we've had. We laughed, we cried, we got ministry approval for the London plan. So I'm prepared to put the whole report on the floor with exception of 12 as one councillor has a conflict.
Councillor Salih.
Can you pull 17?
17. Laws 1 to 20 with the exception of 12 and 17. Moved by the chair, Councillor Park. Any speakers? Let's call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 15-0.
And I'll put item 12 on the floor for properties at 1635 Commissioners Road and 2624 as a councillor has a conflict.
Okay, that's been moved by Councillor Park. Any speakers? Councillor Helmer.
I wanted to say thank you to the staff and the applicant for working through this subdivision. I know this is one that council referred back to see if there was ways we could open up views onto the natural heritage features. There was some disagreement about that, whether we needed to do it or not. I was glad to see that it was referred and that it came back fairly quickly with a few changes that have accomplished those objectives. I'm glad to see that both from the staff and the applicant working together on it.
Other speakers, Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to compliment Councillor Helmer for that, actually. I voted against him and was vehemently opposed to it, but it seems that it came to a very good resolution, and I can take my mea culpa now.
Okay, Kumbaya is next. Any other speakers? Okay, let's call the question.
Councillor Ridley. Closing the vote, and the motion carries 14 with 1 recuse.
Okay, and item number 17, Dundas Place Management and Dundas Fieldhouse. I just wanted to give Mr. Yanchula an opportunity to kind of recap from where we left off last night. We had a very vigorous debate just to talk about the governance structure that's on the table at this point.
Mr. Yanchula, and I'll start a speaker's list.
In terms of the governance structure, I direct your attention to page 286 in the PEC report, because that's where I think it's easy to see at a glance what the intention is for the 2-year pilot program, or actually a 1.5-year pilot program, on how governance would happen. It would start with City Council providing the mandate, goals, objectives, and performance measures Council expects for the Dundas Place manager. That would be operationalized through our core area steering committee. And with that, then what I would call the day-to-day relationship of supervising the Dundas Place manager would be conducted through Main Street London, which is an organization that the city is already a partner in, and would be able to monitor on a day-to-day basis rather than having a full-time staff person joining the staff complement before we knew how it would unfold in practice.
Councillor Sleep.
Okay, that part was a little odd with all due respect, but no worries, because you're kind of preempting what my kind of motion was going to be, and it was, sorry?
Just, I think you're calling a point of order if you're speaking to me in that manner. And Councillor Park's the chair, and she's presenting the report, and she asked Mr. Yanchula to provide some information. She could also have spoken to that as well as she moved the motion. You're first on the speakers list, and so you're up.
Sure. All I said was that was odd, because that's what I was going to be talking about specifically.
Yeah, and Councillor, that's what I was referring to. That Councillor Park, as the chair of the committee, was entirely within her right. She moved a motion to introduce it. She chose to ask Mr. Yanchula to provide information on her behalf as she introduced the motion. And now you're the first speaker, and so you're up. Your 5 minutes begins now.
No, I understand. You said that just before you said that. So, so my motion is to move a motion to change the reporting to council versus, I guess, kind of what I've heard or what I've read is that it would be kind of reporting to the, I guess, a multiple different kind of stakeholders. And I believe that the direct relationship, since most of the funding is coming from the city, should be to city council. So that's the motion I'd like to see put that forward.
Okay, look for a seconder. Deputy Mayor Hubert, you seconding?
No.
Looking for a seconder, please. Seconded by Councillor Van Holst. Okay, as we wait for that motion to come up on screen, Councillor Slee, did you want the floor? You can, okay, so we'll start a speakers list. Anyone interested in speaking to this? Councillor Zafin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, just a question. I'm just not entirely clear of what Councillor Slee is referring to. So just maybe just clarification on what exactly he's looking for in his motion.
Councillor Slee.
The business manager for the Dundas Place, the position that'd be created. That's right now supposed to be on a pilot.
Councillor Zafin. Councillor Zafin has the floor. I'll get you Deputy Mayor Hubert.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you through you to Councillor Slee. And maybe just some clarification then for myself. So right now, the structure that we're looking at for reporting, could maybe staff talk just a little bit about the reporting method that they're talking about, or that Councillor Slee is referring to, and what the differences might be, I guess, council versus what the stakeholders might be. Mr.
Yanchula.
Okay, I'm trying to read the intent behind the question. If the idea is to report to council, as I've heard, that would be unusual, of course, because we have to figure out what arm of the organization in terms of administration this individual would have to report to. And I'm not sure if the intent would be to address it in terms of our area, because it's the downtown plan, or if it would be in operations, or it would be somewhere else. The intent behind the recommendation was to have the position fall in a place where there's already a foundation of cooperation between the Downtown London Business Organization and the city, who meet monthly on all kinds of matters downtown, and have it land there. So I'm trying to distinguish between the two. One would be a direct report model not going through Main Street, and one would be right to the administration, if I understand it correctly. But we would need some direction in terms of where you would think that would land. Is that helpful?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, thank you for that. It is helpful. I just was a little unclear, I guess, from Councillor Slee's motion, what exactly we were looking at from the intent of changing the reporting method. Because I guess with a project, I guess I'm fairly comfortable and used to staff reporting the method that they would normally, not directly to council. And I think reporting through staff downtown London, especially given the magnitude of this project in downtown London, having the people on the ground there makes sense to me. So I'm fine with that, and that explanation is helpful.
Okay, working through our speakers list, is the motion ready to come up on screen? Deputy Mayor Hubert and Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It would be really helpful to have it up on screen, but the only person that reports directly to council is our city manager. So I can't fathom supporting this recommendation. We're trying to leverage resources and coordinate resources and provide, and if that's the intent, now it's up. Okay, that wasn't the language that was used on the floor. It was report to council. So what I think the councillor is suggesting is that it would report to the planning department or.
Okay.
Okay.
Just to, you can hit pause for a second.
Yeah, can we get some clarification
pause
on
for a
the
second.
language?
Yeah, we'll just get some clarification on this. If you could open that up, please, Ms. Westlake Power. If this is the intended motion by the mover and the seconder, could you please indicate that on screen? That will help focus the conversation. Some language was used during debate that is different than the language that's in front of us right now. Okay, that's been moved by Councillor Salee and seconded by Councillor Van Holst. Back over to you, Deputy Mayor Hubert.
So I need and this is where we're doing committee work on the floor, Mr. Mayor, but I need clarification. What's the appropriate city department? Is it the planning department? And it's a programming function. The planning department doesn't do programming. So therefore, is it through Mr. Stafford's department? Parks and Rec does programming. They actually do a pretty darn good job of it. Where's it going? But they program in Victoria Park. They don't program on this new entity called Dundas Place. So we're trying to find synergies. We're trying to find collaborations, and we're going to have a person sort of on their own. So I won't support this.
Councillor Park, did you want to provide some clarification? No. Okay. Mr. Hayward, I know you were trying to catch my attention as well.
Yes, through your worship. This is one of the items I believe that came up yesterday at the budget meeting, and I believe that I had said something about we're bringing this position in on a temporary basis using temporary money. We want to see how it works out and where we would put it in the organisation. So it would be in the City of London organisation is what I was saying, but we would look at how we would deploy it. So would it be Parks and Rec, would it be planning, as Councillor Hubert had indicated. And I believe when Councillor Salee was speaking about that, I had indicated you would have to make some changes with respect to this item, and I believe that's why he's brought this forward, to suggest that it should be in the City of London and not in some other organisation. So City of London has control over the position and how it's deployed. If that provides some clarity, I hope that helps.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hayward. I have Councillor Turner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm perhaps a little more confused than I was to begin with. Is there a suggestion that this could possibly be a position that reports to, say, the London Arts Council or something like that? My read on this is that the City of London Music Office, Core Area Steering Committee, Core Area Coordinating Team, the London Arts Council, London Downtown Business Association, Tourism London will all help inform the activities of what that position would do, but ultimately they're a city employee, are they not?
This is based on the recommendation, Mr. Yanchula, that you brought forward. That's what the question that's being asked is about. So if you could please provide some further clarification.
Yes, the idea of the position is that it would be funded through, the city would provide the funding through the partnership organization that is called Main Street London. So it would be hired through Main Street London on a contract the way that there have been in the past, and there currently are employees of Main Street London as a corporation that the city is a partner funding in. So in this case, for this particular project, all of the funding would be put forth through Main Street London organization. Main Street London would take that up. The city appointed members and the BIA appointed members together would collaborate and be the supervisor of that position after the job description would be set up, after the recruitment, the performance measures that would be expected by City Council and all of that. So in terms of embarking on this experiment or journey and to try to figure out how to manage best London's Dundas Place, we would have to come to council, in my estimation, and say, here's how we think it would go down. Here's what this person would do. Here's how this person would be measured. Here's where this person would report to on a day-to-day basis. And here's how we would analyze the results of that for the 2020 go-forward period if we were to continue with that position.
Thank you, Mr. Yanchula. So I think I'm getting it a little bit more. So ultimately, it seems that the councilor's concern is that the paragraph in here that says the person is proposed to administratively report directly to the Main Street London CEO is what the councilor does not wish to occur, wishes the reporting relationship to be to a manager or a director within the civic administration construct. Okay. Ultimately, here it says the person is proposed to administratively. We're funding or we're passing a planning committee report, and the planning committee report is basically that that staff will come back and say, here's the position, here's how we propose the relationships to work. I think in terms of, we have a lot of relationships out there where we fund positions and other organizations administer those staff members. This isn't abnormal for us. But I think that probably the most appropriate time to make this motion is to actually have heard how it all works first. Before doing this, I think this kind of subverts that process. It subverts for the opportunity for staff to be able to tell us how this will all play out once it's executed. And so I think this is a little early for us to be doing so. So I wouldn't support the motion at this time.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you, Worship. I supported the motion because in my head I had a question that seemed to fall in line with that. We're going to be spending, and this question will of course be through you to our staff, spending a fair bit of money on activation and filling the field house with wonderful things. I'd like to know that we would have a bit of a say on what that is. So before all that money is spent, I would hope to have a report saying, here's the things that we plan to purchase to fill the field house, and the programs we want to provide. Because I would hate to have supported this initiative to the tunes of many hundreds of thousands of dollars and not like what I see. So perhaps I'd ask staff how that might happen in this sort of a case. Would we have some oversight? And I think perhaps the oversight initially in the pilot for us might be stronger than later on.
Mr. Yanchula.
If I haven't heard every aspect of the question, please let me know and I'll try to address it. What I understand the question to be is how would we have oversight during the pilot period if we were to go with the model in the recommendation or in this model?
Yes, thank you very much. In the recommendation, what kind of oversight would we have with respect to that? If it's a great answer, it might satisfy Councillor Salee as well.
Well, I think it's an important thing to understand at this point, and so I'm glad to be answering the questions. In the model, in the report that is envisioned, it would the oversight we'd have is, quite frankly, since I joined the corporation, I think in 2010, I've been the staff representative on Main Street London. So I go to all of the board meetings, and it happens to be I'm the guy that's also been front and center in implementing the downtown plan. And this is the first transformational project in the downtown plan. So we've gone from concept to construction, and now we're into operation. And so in that interim, there is a level of professional responsibility, I suppose, on myself even, to do right by my employer, who I work for, which is you, to make sure that the interests of the city, after the mandate, goals, objectives, and performance measures have been adopted, and you say, okay, go out, do it this way, then it would be up to us after the 2-year program to come back and say, we did it this way, this is what the results were. So I think the question you're asking is what is the direct day-to-day relationship that would ensure that the city knows what's going on at all times with this position during the pilot period, and the practical answer is through my daily work.
Okay, thank you, that's very good. And then maybe let me add another piece on that. The budget for the activation, all the equipment we're going to buy, those kinds of ideas, will we get a chance to see what's proposed before all that money is spent?
So in terms of the budget for the activation and all that stuff, that's part of the capital project at the moment, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn on behalf of the city engineer. That will appear in the project tender. There's various fixed elements, movable elements that would take a forklift to move, and then portable elements that could be brought in and out on a daily or as needed basis. All of that is part of the capital project. So I don't know if that,
no, I think that, you know what, I think that your answer really satisfies me, and kind of steering far afield. That we're not talking about the capital at this time. There will be opportunities for you to learn more about that, opportunities for you to talk about it, but that's not the motion that's before us. So I just ask that you focus your comments in on the motion that's before us.
Okay, thank you. Well, now I've learned what that activation fee is and how the field house fits in. So it seems like our staff is going to be, may come to us and say, here's what we propose, and I'm sure it'll be great. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Yeah, please.
Thank you. I would say, like I said at the planning committee meeting, that this organization is probably the most well poised to take this on. They have day-to-day working relationships with the folks over at Budweiser Garden, who incidentally don't report over to council. They have good working relationships with the folks over at the Grand, who also don't report to council. They have day-to-day working relationships with the businesses along the corridor who give those direct links into, hey, we want to do this weekend. Can we do that? Spill it onto the street, have an event, and those sorts of things. Also, with the core area steering committee in place and Mr. Yanchula sitting both on Main Street and the core area steering committee, I feel like the oversight is there from the administrative point. And don't forget, we also have a councillor that sits on downtown London that sits at the exact same meetings as Main Street London. So yeah, I am satisfied that the oversight is there. I think the expertise is there, and I think that the reporting will be there, absolutely, with the core area steering committee. And it wouldn't hurt to have an annual report to council on how things are working, which we will get because it's a pilot project after all.
Thank you. Councillor Morgan.
Yes, thanks. I didn't mean to speak after the chair, but I think I got missed on the speakers list, so sorry about that. I wanted to say two things. One is, I know through the course of the debate it was suggested that the city manager is the only person who reports to us. That's not true, in my opinion. There's lots of people who report to us. The city solicitor, the only client they have is council. The city manager does an excellent job of managing the employees of the corporation, but there are lots of reports to council. That being said, this is not being suggested to report directly to council. It has been clarified. I do think it's appropriate that if the councillor wants to raise this is the time to raise it. We're endorsing the governance model. The model is pretty specific in how it works, and so if this is something that he wants to raise, I think now is a good time to raise it. And quite frankly, I think there's some good points made, and I'll probably end up supporting him on this one.
Okay, Councillor Slee, would you like to sum up? Any other speakers before we hand things over to Councillor Slee? Councillor Squire?
I'm really happy that Councillor Slee brought this motion forward, and now that I've looked at the reporting, I just think the status of that Dundas Place manager is too far removed from council and too far removed for staff. I know we made a huge investment in terms of what we put into the street, and I know we're going to make a huge yearly investment into the operation of the street, and I would like to have a more direct relationship with the people working on the ground, and I don't see this, so I'll be supporting the motion.
Other speakers before I hand things over to Councillor Slee? Councillor Slee.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, the chair. I don't take any umbrage with anything, and my apologies if that's how I kind of, my body language read off. But the whole intent behind this really is I see the success that we have with our London music officer, Corey, and I see how he's still able to be so involved in the community and with stakeholders, with the music folks, and still have a direct access to the city, but at the same time, the city manager being able to have direct reports from that office, as well as direct influence and direct decision-making pieces. When I talk to my residents in Ward 3 and talk to residents who don't feel part of the core, and to say to them that we're going to invest millions of dollars in this one block, essentially, for a lot of people how they framed it, and for them to feel as if we're not going to have direct access and give more so of the control of the management to stakeholders in the community who I'm sure are experts who sure do great work, but I think it would be a positive step and the right thing to do to have that direct relationship. I know in some cities, based on the report that was provided from staff, that you see there's a different reporting mechanisms in different places. If downtown London was paying for it, okay, but the City of London is paying for it. So I think we should have that direct access, and we should have the direct staff and that reporting mechanism that comes directly to us, because we're talking about millions of dollars. I want to see it be successful, and I think having someone who can, come to council, understands how they can get an agenda faster than later on a report here, have that direct relationship, or if something needs to change, because if this council decides to tell Martin Hayward, we want to do this, change it now, but now he has to, from I guess what it would appear, have to go before Main Street or whatever the board is or whatever this group is and appeal to them and say to them, can you guys do this because this is what council now wants to do all of a sudden, I think doesn't sit well with for me, and I think is in a positive step in the right direction. I think we can avoid all of that and allow our great city manager to have direct influence and direct control over that area as well.
Thank you. There are no additional speakers, so I'll call the question. We're voting.
Councillor Cassidy? Closing the vote, and the motion is lost, 6-9.
Okay, main motion, Chair. Any speakers? Councillor Helmer.
Can you just call C2 separately?
We will call C2 separately. Colleagues, we'll deal with C2 of Clause 17 first. It's been moved by Councillor Park. Any discussion? Mr. Helmer?
Just since no one can see the clause now, this is one about providing operational funding, which we dealt with yesterday. I was opposed to it. I want to be consistent. Those who were not opposed to it, pay attention to what you're doing.
Okay. Any other speakers? We'll call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 10-5.
Okay. And on the balance. That's been moved by the chair, Councillor Park. Let's call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote, the motion carries 12-3.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Park. Thank you for your leadership over the past year as Chair of Planning and Environment Committee. Okay, added reports. This is the 26th report, public report of Council in closed session.
Do you want to do that?
Let's do SPPC first. Deputy Mayor Hubert, if you could move that, please.
Thank you, Mayor. It's just for reference, it's available on the addeds tonight. I'll put the entire report on the floor. This is primarily our public participation meeting on the budget, along with...
Any speakers? Okay, it's been moved by Deputy Mayor Hubert on screen. You want to speak to that? Okay, Councillor Morgan.
Yes, I did want to just speak briefly to this, because this is the approval of the Board of Directors for the new Hyde Park Business Improvement Area, and certainly encourage colleagues to support this. There was an AGM. These are the individuals who were supported by the members at the AGM. It was a great event. Deputy Mayor Hubert was there, and I'm really looking forward to the work that these individuals will be able to do. And of course, their budget will be coming forward to council in the future. So encourage you to support this, and great work to everybody who's been involved in developing the BIA, and thanks to council for supporting them through the process.
Other speakers? Let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 15-0.
Deputy Mayor Hubert, while you are up, would you mind presenting the 26th public report of the council in closed session? We've got audit committee as well. Pardon me, go for it.
Don't skip over the exciting stuff. Last night we actually had a question, and I wanted to say you're all welcome at audit, where we deal with these things regularly. So I'll put the 9th report of the audit committee on the floor. We did receive our first real report from our new internal auditor, Deloitte, and went very well. It's in the cash handling area over in Parks and Rec. And I trust that you all took a chance to look at what the format's going to be, because that really was part of the big outcome, is what the format of these audit reports are going to be on a go-forward basis. So I'll be happy to put that on the floor.
Any speakers? Let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote, and the motion carries 15-0.
And I think we have the 26th report of council in closed session. I would like to report progress on a number of items that we were in closed session for. I do have one item to report out in public session, which is as follows. It's a tender 1799 lease of city-owned land for billboard advertising. That is a procedural matter pursuant to section 239-6 Municipal Act 2001. The following recommendation be forwarded to council in closed session for the purpose of considering whether a recommendation should be forwarded to council for deliberation of vote in public session. Then on the recommendation of the Managing Director, Corporate Services, and City Treasurer, Chief Financial Officer, on the advice of the Manager of Realty Services, lease agreement between the City Corporation of the City of London and Patterson Outdoor Advertising by its general partner, Patterson Outdoor Advertising Limited, with respect to the lease of city-owned land for billboard advertising be approved. That's it.
It's up on screen. Moved by Deputy Mayor Hubert. Speakers, Councillor Van Holst.
All right. Thank you very much, Your Worship. I'm very, very excited about this having gone forth. Of course, we changed our sign bylaw to entertain the possibility of digital billboards, bringing us into the 21st century. And of course, that has made our properties that we lease billboards more valuable, and we're making substantially more money off of this tender, $50,000. And also, what's wonderful is that we're going to be getting space on these digital billboards to promote city messaging, arts, and other issues that are important. And there's also the possibility for us to sell that advertising if we wanted, or perhaps repatriate some of the money that we give to for instance, the fire department when they do advertising on billboards, which is very common. So that's exciting. We'll be getting 3 minutes every hour, about 5% of the advertising for those kinds of things. I think it's going to make a big difference, and I'm looking forward to the creativity we'll be able to put into these opportunities. be very interesting to have a big convention and then on the billboard be able to say, welcome conferees to London. I think that would be an exciting thing for them to see, many valuable things that we'll be able to do as a result of this. So thank you very much to our staff for all the work. I'm thrilled. This was a long time in coming, and we had to put it off a couple of years, but I think the result is great, and this is a big victory. Thank you, Your Worship. I'll be supporting it.
Thanks for your leadership on this one as well, Councillor Van Holst. Any other speakers? Okay, you have the last word on that one, Councillor Van Holst. Let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 15-0.
Deferred matters, there are none. Inquiries. Okay. Emergent motions. Moving on to bylaws. Any bylaws with conflict, we're going to call Bill 667, 668 separately, as well as 679. So let's move the balance. We can put those all together. As the clerk has pointed out, it's a single conflict. We've also added 680, 681, and 682. First reading moved by Councillor Van Holst, seconded by Councillor Armstrong. Let's call the question. We're voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 15-0.
Second reading. Any speakers? Councillor Morgan, others?
Yes, Your Worship. I know we've used the term policy wonk at this council before, and I just want to point out that Bill number 681 is a bylaw to adopt a new council policy, which is a policy to establish the maintenance of our policies. That sounds like a big policy mess, but what it is we're actually cleaning up and continuing the work on cleaning up the policy council under the leadership of the governance working group and Councillor Ridley. And this is a lot of progress. That's the framework for us actually taking care of that policy, hopefully in time, to hand everything off in ship shape to the next council.
Okay, that's been moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Usher. Let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 15-0.
And third reading. Third reading moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Park. Let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 15-0.
We'll get those last three bylaws to come up on screen. Moved by Councillor Van Holst, seconded by Councillor Park. First reading, Bills 667, 668, 679. Voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 14 with 1 recused.
And second reading, any speakers? Moved by Councillor Van Holst, seconded by Councillor Hopkins. Let's call the question. Voting.
Closing the vote and the motion carries 14 with 1 recused.
And third reading. This is moved by Councillor Turner, seconded by Councillor Park. Let's call the question. Voting.
Councillor Usher. Closing the vote and the motion carries 14 with 1 recused.
Colleagues, that brings us to adjournment. Thanks for a couple of great days. Adjournment moved by Councillor Armstrong, seconded by Councillor Van Holst. And all those in favor, opposed if any, a reminder that dinner is prepared for you up on the 12th floor, and eagerly awaiting your attendance. Thanks for a great couple of days. And again, we don't need the Thursday budget meeting because we wrapped it up last night. Thanks, everybody.